Hi, my name is Laura Bergells. I'm a writer who lives in Grand Rapids, Michigan. I wrote Public Speaking Fundamentals for the Linda Online Library. In early April, Payam contacted me through my Facebook page. He told me that he is a public speaker and that he watched my public speaking videos on lynda.com. He also told me that he holds a monthly conference about public speaking and that you are now celebrating your first anniversary together as a public speaking group. Congratulations. Payam and I wrote back and forth a little bit. He shared a link to a video of a speech from one of the conferences that you held last year. Now, even though I cannot understand your language, I watched that video. And Payam, he was 100% correct. I do not understand your spoken language. But there are three things that I did understand. I understood the speaker's body language, I understood his facial gestures, and I noticed how he used silence. I would see him take dramatic pauses. I would listen. His voice would sometimes become quicker, and then other times he would slow down. So in a way, I'm almost glad that I didn't understand his spoken language, because it made me pay closer attention to the story he was telling without using words. And that's what I want to discuss with you today. Emotionally connecting to your story without using spoken words. Now, certainly as public speakers, you are very focused on your spoken words. But how can you captivate your audience by using more than just your words? Today, I'd like to discuss the top three methods: facial expressions, body language, and the sound and pace of your voice. And I'd like to discuss the importance of these three methods by telling you a little story about my work with an executive here in the United States. Back in April, last month, I had worked with a CEO who was very excited about giving a motivational speech to an audience of professionals. When I reviewed his written speech, I was thrilled. His speech was only 20 minutes long, but it was packed with small stories. Now, like you, I am a big believer in the power of telling stories. I think that sharing stories is a critical component in any speech. I've only been talking for a short time, and I've already told you about three stories. Number one, I told you about Payam contacting me through Facebook. Number two, I told you a story about watching a speaker video where I didn't understand the language. And three, right now, I am in the middle of telling you a story about an executive that I worked with last month. Even these tiny little stories like these, they help connect all of us to each other, even if we're oceans and languages and cultures that keep us separated. So let me get back to this tech executive that I was working with last month. This very smart man understood the power of storytelling. To begin his speech, he told a charming story about being a child and pretending to be a famous detective that drove a fancy red sports car. And he told this story about his little game of make-believe got him into a little bit of trouble with his neighbors and his parents. Now, I want you to try something for me. I'm imagining you sitting in your chair, listening to me talk. You might not understand my words, and perhaps you're reading the words of your language as I speak underneath me. Right now, I'm going to stop speaking for a few minutes so that you can try something. I want you to think about this one phrase, a silly phrase. When I was a child, I pretended to be a famous detective. Now ask yourself, what is your face doing when you are thinking about this silly phrase? Are you smiling, maybe just a little? Or are you frowning, thinking, no, this is not something I'm going to do, no? Or are you furrowing your brow, thinking, why is this strange woman asking me to do such a weird and foolish thing? Now, if you thought that was foolish, here's something even more silly. Go ahead and look at the person sitting next to you and let him or her look at you in your face. Go ahead, I'll just wait a few moments. You see, In many situations, it's hard not to smile or laugh a little when we imagine children playing. And it can be really difficult not to have some kind of emotional reaction, whether it's positive or negative, when we're asked to do something very silly in a public place, like when a strange woman asks you to look at the facial expression of the person sitting next to you. You may not understand the words that I am saying, but chances are you are picking up all kinds of emotional information by looking at the expressions on my face while you're reading the captions and listening to the tone of my voice. Now let's get back to the man who was telling stories during his speech, my friend the CEO. To close his speech, he told a story about the last words his father said to him before he died. Now, as you might imagine, the man could not use the same facial expression for that story. Everything about his face, his body, the tone of voice, it needed to change because he went from a silly, childish story to a much more serious and heartfelt one. And yet I see many executives that have an extremely difficult time connecting their facial gestures, their body language, the tone of voice to the emotional content of their stories. It's as if they think they won't be taken seriously if they crack a smile. In my experience, the exact opposite is true. They will not only be taken more seriously, they will be taken as human. They will be more relatable to their audiences. They will form a deeper emotional connection, which is important for a motivational or a persuasive or a sales speech. If this is something that you struggle with, try this exercise. The next time you're rehearsing a speech where you'll be telling a story, pretend that you're telling your story not to a group of serious business people, but to a group of 9-year-old children. Now this is, of course, only an exercise, and it's something of a trick. When you think of speaking to a group of children, I want you to notice how your facial expressions and your body language and the tone of your voice will change. Now, I am not suggesting that you pretend you're speaking to children when you actually do get up to give your speech. That would be insulting to the audience. It would be patronizing. But go through this exercise when you're in rehearsal so that you can feel the difference. Then ask yourself, what can you use from this exercise to connect to an audience of adults? Some of the exaggerated gestures you may use with children can later be toned down a little for an adult audience, but this is a great first step in getting in touch with what your feelings are and getting a sense of your emotional range. Try rehearsing your speech as if you're talking to children. You might be surprised to discover that your body and your voice possess more emotional intensity than you ever realized. And to close, I'd like to hear back from you. One of my interests is using interactive technologies like these to communicate across cultures. I could not resist participating in your conference today because as little as 10 years ago, the technology could not have supported this kind of communication. Now that technology is helping to bring cultures closer together, how can we further improve communication and understanding? I'd be honored if you'd share your feedback and insights with me. You can find me on Twitter and on Facebook, as well as at my blog. Enjoy the rest of your conference.